Hello, my name is Sydney Lamb, and today I'm going to talk to you about events that have made an impact on the education of English language learners, laws, and court decisions. First, I'm going to take you through a timeline of the historical events that have had an effect on bilingual education. First was Brown v. Board of Education in 1954, then Elementary and Secondary Education Act of 1965, the Bilingual Education Act of 1968, Lau v. Nichols Court Case of 1974, the Equal Educational Opportunities Act also of 1974, Castaneda v. Picard of 1981, English for the Children Initiative, Proposition 227 of 1998, No Child Left Behind of 2001, Race to the Top of 2009, and the 2017 English Learner Roadmap. First of all, I'll talk about Brown v. Board of Education of 1954. Essentially, this was a case regarding segregation and whether or not it was constitutional to segregate students according to their race in an educational from an educational standpoint. And the ruling was that separate is not equal, meaning that you cannot segregate these students, and it is not constitutional. And this also goes down to that. School districts cannot fully separate students to help them learn English. So students or districts think that they have to have a full inclusion classroom with all of their English language learners all in one classroom without being separated. And the state responsibilities that came about this court decision was that states must provide students with equal educational opportunities, which opened the door to a possibility of bilingual programs. The Elementary and Secondary Education Act of 1965 addressed the needs of the academic needs of poor children, and while it did improve the education of English language learners, it also blurred the lines of authority over public education for the federal, state, and local levels. The Bilingual Education Act of 1968 was written by Senator Ralph Yarbrough of Texas. He's pictured here on the left. It was the first federal educational language policy. In Ralph Yarbrough's bill, it included federal funding to be provided for school districts in order to support bilingual educational programs. Regulations could only occur within funded programs, and school districts had a choice whether or not to include bilingual education programs. So if you didn't choose to try and be a funded program, you had no regulations at all. And then students also had to be both poor and of limited English speaking ability, so there was a bit of a deficit view when it came to the Bilingual Education Act. And there's no included definition of bilingual education in the Bilingual Education Act. In the Lau v. Nichols court case of 1974, the background of this was that it occurred in San Francisco with Chinese American students. These students were placed in mainstream classes despite their lack of English language proficiency, and they were left to fend for themselves. The district claimed that because the students were included with their native English-speaking peers, that they were receiving equal treatment. But Justice William Douglas claimed that even though these students were given access to identical educational materials, the students were not given equal access to their education, as they could not have any meaningful education if they cannot understand what they're being taught. And the significance of the Lau v. Nichols court case was the Lau remedies. And these addressed districts that were ignoring the needs of their ELL students and required implementation of bilingual education programs. The Equal Educational Opportunities Act of 1974 included Section 1703F, which declared that no state shall deny educational opportunities to an individual on account of his or her race, color, sex, or national origin by the failure of an educational agency to take appropriate action to overcome language barriers that impede equal participation by its students in its instructional programs. Essentially, what that long quote was saying was that states cannot discriminate against their students even through language barriers. This section of the Equal Educational Opportunities Act also had similar language as to the Civil Rights Act, but instead it also included language barriers as a way to not discriminate against students. So it added things to the discrimination, what you cannot discriminate against. And the significance of this act was that it was used as a precedent in many laws and court cases following this. In Castaneda v. Picard of 1981, it had to do with the Equal Educational Opportunities Act, Section 1703F. It says that schools must take appropriate action to overcome language barriers that prevent equal participation by all students. And so it means that educational neglect violates civil rights, regardless of the district's discriminatory intentions. So even if they didn't mean to, it still violates the rights. And there are 3 criteria for programs serving LEP students. They must be based on sound educational theory. They must be implemented effectively, meaning that there are adequate resources and personnel provided. And there must be a trial period that is then evaluated regarding whether or not it is effective in overcoming language barriers. The English for the Children initiative of California Proposition 227 of 1998 was developed by a California software developer who had no background in bilingual education and had no idea or done any research about bilingual education, so he had no clue what he was really writing about. But he developed a proposition that eliminated bilingual education from California public schools. He claimed that bilingual education programs violated students' rights to learn English as immigrants. Although there was a choice that parents could sign a waiver to continue their students' bilingual education, and many schools did this so that they could continue with their bilingual education programs. The No Child Left Behind of 2001 was worded so that it replaced Title 7 of the Bilingual Education Act with Title 3, Language Instruction for Limited English Proficient and Immigrant Students. And the word bilingual was removed, and it also no longer focused on a deficit of speaking ability as with the title of Limited English Speaking Ability in the Bilingual Education Act. And when the No Child Left Behind Act, on identifying ELL students, home language surveys are given at time of enrollment to see if the students have a primary home language other than English or a float. And then float students are assessed with an ELP test to determine their proficiency level. And if they're lower than proficient, they're identified as ELL students. So if they have a primary home language other than English, but they are above proficient, then they are not identified as ELL students. And then this act also introduced English language proficiency standards and assessments. So it's based on language skills of listening, reading, writing, and speaking. Raised to the top of 2009 was an education reform with grant funding. There are 4 requirements to funds. They must adopt benchmark standards, which prep for college and life success, as well as provides assessments that are useful for all students, including ELLs and students with disabilities. Secondly, you must recruit and retain good teachers and principals. There is a data system that measures student success and informs teachers how to improve instruction. And fourth, there must be effective intervention to turn around low-performing schools. When it comes to high-stakes testing, there are still a lot of concerns with this one because ELLs may still be taking tests that are invalid and their scores will suffer. Excuse me. The English Learner Roadmap of California replaced the outdated law that mandated ELL students to be taught in English-only classes, as with Proposition 227. It provided supplementary resources for districts that guides curriculum, instruction, and standards. It is significant because it helps schools meet federal and state requirements for teaching ELLs, reshapes how California teachers teach their ELL students, and improves the quality of education for ELL students. And some facts about this is that it affects 1.4 million ELL students in California public schools. And it's the first new language policy in more than 20 years. And that's the end of my slideshow. I hope you enjoyed it. I sure enjoyed talking to you. Thank you. Have a good day.